Yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for your patience and for coming in and attending our second official Red River webinar. This is not an official meeting per se. And the distinction, of course, is that we're not going to be having things like an MBA report or a financial report or a reading of the minutes. But I do want to take a minute and thank everyone for their contributions to the newsletter this last month. There's been a definite uptick of people submitting everything from cartoons to recipes to articles that they see online, which I can then hunt down for permissions and abridge. And it really makes a difference because it turns it into, um, you know, my creation to Red River's creation. And the more people that contribute to a community newsletter, the more depth and the more meaning it has. So thank you very much for all of that. If anyone had an issue with getting their newsletter, feel free to email or call me. And lastly, we will be doing a novice webinar in the less than in probably in about 7 days. So I have received people requesting to be on the invite list. I appreciate that. But since we do have a crowd here, if anyone hasn't requested an invite to the next novice seminar, please send me an email and I'll get them onto the invite list. So we are gathered here today to discuss swarming and splitting hive month. And I know people are looking at the thermostat and looking at the how late things are getting pushed back because of our unseasonable cool weather. But swarming and splitting usually once when it becomes apparent that it's an issue, it's generally too late to be proactive about it. And that's why we would like to do this early to get this into the forefront of people's minds so that they can be looking for the signs and taking preventative steps now and making observations now to prevent disappointment down the road. So Tim has very graciously put together a PowerPoint for us to go through. A lot of this will be roundtable discussions. If you're unfamiliar with WebEx, you'll notice that if you look at your name on the list to the right hand of the screen, there will be a chat bubble where you can type in a question, and there'll also be a hand icon where you can click if you've got a question to ask or something to contribute. So if something along the entire presentation where you want to make a point or have a question, please click that and we will try to bring your all the attention onto you. So without further ado, Tim,
Yes, sir.
why don't you lead us off here?
Okay. As John has said, we're going to be having a roundtable discussion. It's not necessarily a thorough how to swarm and or how to prevent swarming and how to do splitting, but it's going to be a discussion. So I had actually asked a few people to come on board, and if I call upon your name to just basically speak up a little bit and share a little bit on your own, I trust that you know how to turn on and off your microphone so that you're able to engage. And this applies to anybody who would like to add or, like John said, have a question, etc. So we're going to start off with a few. Here we go. Okay, getting used to this mouse here. So we're going to ask a few things, and obviously, as John said, it's May 12th. It's been cold, freezing, rain, snow in some places. So one of my first questions, and I'd like to get a little bit of feedback from you, is what have you observed within your hives to date in these last few months? For example, have you had food shortage or abundance from overwintering? Have you large bee density or lower size in spring hives? And what has been your mite population currently for right now? So if you can answer some of those questions, and whoever's on there.
So anyone willing to answer the question, if you could just raise your hand, virtually, of course.
if Josh Weeb is on board, I would love to hear from you if you can, or anybody.
Okay, we're gonna start picking people at random. So,
David, you did some. David Lee, you did some indoor wintering. What was your experience in regards to the Xing it out? When did you take it out? Too early, too late? The freezing temperatures. Are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I took them out first week of April. It wasn't too bad. Of course, we got the snowstorm. I took a hint from Brad, and I actually insulated around my hives when I got them out. I'm thankful I did, because we got that cold snap, -18. And they did okay. They came through. I put patties on as soon as I could. And I used the Waldemar recipe for the patties with the icing sugar. And they devoured them. They really utilized the protein and the sugar syrup, or the sugar, I guess you could say. Then I started pail feeding once it warmed up a bit, and I put more patties on. And we warmed up a little bit, then it turned cold, so they're devouring the patties. I put on 1 pail, 1 gallon only. I didn't want to overfeed them. They still have lots of food. I have a good couple of boxes, like a box of bees. Actually, tonight I just double boxed the full boxes of bees, and I took that from Ian. And I was really hesitant of going on top, but I kind of held back until the weather turned. So now, fingers crossed, it's turning. So that's where I'm at, and I have treated with Apivar.
Okay, excellent. When you put your second box, when did you do that? Before this?
Tonight.
Eh?
Tonight. I just did
excellent.
it today.
So after the frost, eh? Okay.
Yeah, like I've been sitting on it, and I knew I had boxes of bees, and I was going to go under, and I'm looking at the weather. Okay, I'm going to just do it today. I mean, I'm hoping we're through it.
Did you have any concerns about overpopulation before this frost came in, or this cold spell, and swarming?
Yeah, they're full. Their boxes are full, and there's cups underneath. But it's been so damn cold. I mean,
yeah,
I don't. Yeah. If it was warmer, it would have been interesting, because I would have done it sooner.
Right on. Good. I picked up one point that you mentioned there, Dave, and that is that you took it out from indoor and you ended up covering them up and possibly provided a little bit of, I guess, safety net or insurance or whatever you want to call it. I think I see Josh here. Josh, are you around?
Yeah, sorry, a little late.
No problem. You saw my first few questions there. I know that you put up a video recently in regards to some of your challenges that you've had. Can you talk a little bit about that and your spring management, and also include the fact that we've had this very cold temperature? So how did you work out your apiary to try to prevent the swarming if you had lots going on, or killing in the frost?
Yeah, sure. So some of you might know that we run all of our bees through as a double nuke formation, so 2 nukes in a single deep. And when you're looking at nukes and indoor wintering, when they come out of the shed, you're looking at about 40 days before that population needs to be replaced by fresh bees. And so we put them out into some nice weather, and I think it was about a week later, we ended up getting really cold weather coming through. So that head start that we would be looking for, where they replace that population quickly with the first round, it just never did happen for us. The larger populations, they definitely replaced what was there, but there was no extra boost with that first round of brood. The smaller ones, unfortunately, they had to shrink back down, cover what brood they could, and that ended up causing some issues with anything smaller, like 2 frames in a nuke or something. The ones that didn't come through with a larger population, typically we would see, I don't know, 65% survival on something that's small. But what we ended up losing a bunch of them actually through that first cold spell. So I think this week, according to my calendar, is when we'll be going through the second emergence. And so anything that's made it this far should be doing quite well.
Okay. Excellent. I was going to ask Ian to give me a little bit of report. I know he had done a video recently, and although I think he's out collecting swarms off his trees right now, so he couldn't be out here tonight. Actually, I think he's out feeding or seeding the field right now, so he couldn't be on tonight. But I was hoping he'd give me a little bit of report. But he had mentioned something about hives being in that 6 to 8 frame, actually more like 8 frames of brood, 8 to 9 frames of bees, and of course he had a tremendous amount of concern, by the looks of it, regarding the cold weather temperatures, etc., happening in there. Does anybody else want to add or make any statements in regards to their experience?
I would like to quickly, if possible, I'm not sure if Waldemar's microphone is active, but Waldemar, are you there?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Great, great, great. You are one of the beekeepers who usually has some pretty phenomenal winter loss, like low numbers. And I have seen pictures of your bees, and you're coming out of winter with like 7 or 8 frames strong. And if and I know that because of your side business of selling nukes, that's exactly where you want to be. And I think nuke preparation really takes care of your swarming issues naturally. But if you, for instance, were not in the nuke business and you were coming through, or your hives came through with just phenomenal shape and with enough replacements being hatched out to cover the winter die-offs, what steps would you be taking right now to make sure that swarming wasn't going to be an issue in the weeks coming up?
Well, if you look at the situation that we went through, actually, there's a lot of older population that actually has died off, and there's still, I would say, 25 to 30% of winter bees in the hives, but majority is already hatched. And what you can do actually, if it warms up, add foundation into the hives, because this is how you start loading up the young bees and get them going to actually build some foundation while you still feed them. Or if, like for example, today when I inspected some hives, I came across some fresh nectar that I'm assuming came in actually from the maples, because they were bringing a light brown greenish pollen in that usually comes from the maple.
Mm-hmm.
So basically loading up the hive with a lot of work. Keeps them going for a while, but eventually they reach that threshold too. And so at that point in time, see, we're looking at all of this from the view of a beekeeper. We also need to understand what the bees are actually wanting to do. And the main thing is actually reproduction. And genetics are playing a big role in that. We're already a long time not keeping bees natural. We're selecting for quite a while for non-swarming populations. And the genetics that are selected into that direction allows you actually to have bigger clusters without them going into swarming. The up and down temperature is actually a very bad driver for swarming, because the up and down actually will not give them a smooth development, but this jerking up and down development will trigger actually more the swarming than anything else.
Really? Like, so this temperature fluctuation is causing more of it's worse than it could be if it was just a normal spring?
Absolutely. I predict this to be once this warms up, I predict this to be a pretty severe swarming spring and summer.
Well, and another reason why we're sort of tackling this topic now. One of the things that the Red River Apiarists Association does is we have a swarm patrol every summer. And now with the COVID restrictions, we're not really sure on how we're going to be handling that. So we've got a little bit of a perfect storm brewing. Thank you very much, Waldemar. I appreciate your insight, especially from the unique position that you're in. Tim, over to you.
Yeah, that's right on. I'm going to be having Wald speak a little bit more on what he just commented a few slides down the road here. So stick by, don't go for coffee or anything like that. Some of the clues that are early in the spring that some beekeepers like to keep an eye on is basically observing when the natural pollen is brought in. I don't know if anybody recalls exactly when they start seeing the first pollen in April being brought in. Anybody want to comment? I know for me,
I've seen it for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, about April. What time in April?
I'd say as soon as the leaves started to bud. I think the willows were the first. It was first it was brown pollen.
Yeah.
Then I see yellow, and I think that was from willows.
Okay.
Once the pussy willows are up, I mean, I've seen pussy willows probably the first week of April on the poplar.
Okay. Right on. Yeah, and every area is going to be different. In my case, I saw them somewhere around April 23rd. I started seeing big, and then the next day it just exploded. So everybody will be in different areas. The next hint is the drones. When did you first see drones in your hive? And this is open for anybody. For me, again, was the 23rd. I went to a couple of hives there, and I already saw drones, just a few walking around, and they were already making drone combs, etc. So that's another hint that tells you that this is developing, and that they're going to get ready for that next cycle of growth there. So now, question to every beekeeper there: what signs help you determine if it's time to deal with this growth? Obviously, we have pollen coming in. We've got drones. Anything else? Any comments?
Frames of capped brood.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about capped broods. So, what do you think is a significant number of capped brood? How many frames? 1, 2, 8, 9?
Well, I would think anything 7, 8. Because 1 frame of brood is 3 frames of bees, correct?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
So if you've got a box of bees or box of brood, 7, 8 frames of brood times that by 3, I think you got a tight box.
You got a big yes. So everybody has different ways of having brood. Some have single brood box, others have double brood box. And these are some of the questions that you'll be needing to start to answer. And that's what we're going to try to answer a few of these here. Do I split my hive now, make a nuke with 3 brood frames? Or do I put another box on top and create a second brood box if you're a single brood producer? And then what next? And the other thing too is, do you have mated queens? How many here have been buying queens and getting queens already? No comment? So when you go into a hive, and we're going to look at some swarming behavior, do you know the difference between a queen cup and a queen cell? Can anybody point out which one is which, besides the ones that have been at it for a little while? Any comments? So when you go into a hive and you're wanting to know if you're going to be having swarm behavior here going on, you want to be able to know the difference between a queen cup and a queen cell. Can anybody comment on which one is which and what's the difference? And in this photo, there's one of each.
Laura says that the cup is on the left and the cell is on the right.
That's correct. And what's the difference between the two? The cup is being developed, and the cell, the queen has hatched. So there's three different reproductive swarms, and I'd like other people to chime in here. I don't want to be able to just take on this whole thing on our own, but we've got three different behaviors of swarm. We have what we call the reproductive swarms, the congestive swarms, and the absconding swarms. So if anybody has any comments on this here, I can give you a couple of little notes here that I picked up from some of my readings and studies. A reproductive swarm is what we experience now, and I think Waldemar just mentioned that at this time of the year in the spring we have the reproductive swarm, and that's a natural, and we're more familiar with this particular type of swarming behavior. To a complex balance of the increased number of bees and a correlated reduction of pheromone concentrations within the hive. So there's a very complex formula here that caused the bees, or the hive in this case here, to begin to have that instinctive reproduction. Obviously, there's a few other reasons why this reproduction and this behavior happens here. So there are interesting data that suggests, someone's mic is still on here. There are interesting data that suggest a high correlation in numbers of varying bees within the developing hive. And I was watching a video, which at the end of this presentation, you can take down the YouTube information there and take a look at it. I would strongly encourage you, and I've mentioned his name before, Dr. Clarence Collison, and he had a very interesting presentation there where he talked about the correlation between the adult number of bees, adult bees, I should say, and the correlation between that and the brood cells in a hive. So he uses, and I'm going to use this here. He says that when you have 20,000 adults in a hive, the correlation would be about 15,000 brood cells approximately, and it's about 0.75 ratio, or a 75% ratio here in this case here. And the way he explained that was basically that 75% of the adults in that 20,000 were caring for that brood. But as the numbers increase over time, like I think in some of our cases, we're starting to see 8 to 10 frames of adult bees and about 6 to 7 or 8 frames of brood. He suggests that when the hive gets into that 50,000 adult population, I lost my notes here, and about you'll have about 19,000 in brood cells. So there's a correlation of only 0.38%, which really means that 38% of the population is now out doing its foraging, and sorry, I should say 38% are looking after the brood, and the difference is out foraging. So even though the numbers increase, you will see that there's less and less number of bees caring for that brood, and that's why the hive is building up so rapidly. It's a worthwhile video to watch because it kind of talks a little bit more thoroughly about the reproductive swarm. This is a natural evidence of good management and good beekeeping. Bees are going to work to that level. The ability of the beekeeper is to be able to control and to be able to have the resources and the ability to try to use that growing resource to create other opportunities, whether you're going to create new nuke boxes or a new hive, etc. That is very important. The next, any questions in that one, reproductive right now?
Waldemar has a question, Tim.
Okay.
Waldemar?
Am I on?
Yes,
Yeah.
you are. Yes, you are.
Just one comment on this. Again, the study has been done on selected bees. It's not actually a natural hive that lives in the wild, because it's based on selected genetics already. If you would actually take a wild hive that reproduces and casts about 4 swarms every season, this entire theory would be not applicable, because swarming is genetically ingrained. And there are races out there that will swarm the population below 30,000, and they will swarm until there is nothing left. So I'm just stating this because I've been breeding queens for a very long time, and I know how quick it goes from very good to very bad once you start actually using swarm cells for starting up your nukes or requeening your hives. The entire approach of selecting for low swarming hives will get thrown out within 2 generations.
Just a quick question, Waldemar, because I've actually experienced this too. It was mainly because, like, when a hive gets that swarming mentality, you mentioned that some of them will swarm and swarm and swarm and basically swarm themselves out of existence.
Exactly.
Is that just a genetic tweak, or is there a way to break that sort of behavior, maybe shaking out, or is that just something where you want to like end the genetic line by killing the queens and starting fresh?
Well, you can still recuperate from this by eliminating actually the queen. You can still reuse the bees, but basically what happens is, even if, let's say, you start a nuke this year with a swarm cell, that hive will swarm itself out next year. And if you continue with that approach next year, the year after, you will not be able to control your swarming anymore. It's just gonna keep on going on, because it's like a switch. It's ingrained. It's a natural surviving instinct. And we've been selecting for years and years for something where that switch is turned off. And once you allow that switch to come on again, it stays on.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I did get a question from one of our members. Dave Beluk writes in, approximately how many frames is the brood cell at 15,000? So I guess what he's asking is, if you open up the inner cover, if there's 15,000 brood, how many frames of bees would you be seeing covering the box? Waldemar.
A pound of bees, or 2.2 pounds of bees, holds about 10,000. So that's the average package that you get. And once you actually put an average package into a hive, it covers approximately 5 frames. So by 15, you'd be somewhere around 7.5 frames, I would say.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah,
Tim?
that's a great question.
Tim,
That's
over to
great.
you. Tim, over to you.
Okay, thanks. That's a great question. And there is a strong correlation. I have been working on a mathematical calculator here, and I was talking to Walter about it. And I've seen different formats of this same thing. And I think Dr. Clarence Collison, kind of use that same information, where there's a correlation between the number of adult bees and you can almost calculate, to a certain degree, obviously, when you get complications like temperature, etc., when that hive could potentially be in the potential to swarming, I guess. We're going to talk a little bit more about genetics and the swarming thing coming up, and I think Wald will add some more to that in a minute. let's go with the second point of congestive swarm, as the title suggests. Congestive meaning that it happens when a hive is out of extra laying space or reduced. And it could be a number of reasons, but it could be honey bound because either we put up too much syrup or they've collected too much or whatever, and they filled up the brood box. And usually this happens following a peak or a strong nectar flow. So this is a different type of swarming. This is a different type of swarming behavior. And in this case here, it's just there's no room in that brood box. And then, of course, we have what we call the absconding swarm. That's a population evacuation of a hive. And that can happen anytime during the year, but the whole entire hive, the queen including, and without any obvious motivation or a motive for the colony dealing with level reproductions, they can just go off. And sometimes it could be triggered by pests. If there's a high mite count overloaded inside the hive, or maybe there's been some bear attacks or some other creatures, etc. Floods, high water levels, chemical exposures, or even chemical contamination. And I'm actually I may be running into one of those situations right now. One of my apiaries, I found that my population's dropping rapidly, and I'm going to be doing some investigation this week, but I have a feeling that there may have been some chemical contamination. And of course, disease outbreaks would also cause this absconding and completely clearing out the hive. There's a book that I've been using in some of my information. You can, and I have it listed at the bottom of our presentation here. It's called the Swarm Essentials. You can get them at Bee Made. It's written by this gentleman here. You can see his name there. I'll have this at the end of the list so you can take a picture of it. There's a lot of information that explains the whole entire swarming behavior, etc. Very useful information for all of us who are starting out, etc. Any comments or criticisms or anything you want to say here? Some of the causes of swarming. So I would like to get some input from anybody that's on the line here right now in regards to any of these areas. Now, Waldemar, talk a little bit about genetic strain. Did someone say something?
Yeah, Tim, instead of opening up the floor, because some people are shy or aren't really using the hands up, ask a question button, I think you should just pick victims randomly and let's see what they have to say.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a good idea. So, although I can't see who's on the list, so maybe John, you can pick somebody, some poor person. But we've talked about the lack of space for the queen to lay eggs. That's a very common mistake that happens in the spring here, especially when us new people are very excited to get a stimulated hive going. We end up feeding and doing a lot of things, and we kind of forget that they probably don't need as much nectar or syrup, and we end up filling 6 frames of comb with honey syrup, I should say, and then all of a sudden we end up really destroying. And I've done that in the years past. I've had Waldemar come in and he looks at my hives. The first thing he says, "You've been crowding your bees." So I had to clean that out. Crowding is another issue. Can anybody comment on what crowding is? No comments? Waldemar has raised his hand. Wald?
Hold on. Yeah, go ahead, Waldemar.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
One thing I'd like to add, there's a swarm that was missing on your list. And you had 3 swarms that you mentioned.
Yep.
there is actually a fourth possibility, and it's very common, specifically when you have actually young queens that go for a mating flight. Most of the hives, even if you just have cups in them, and they are slightly overpopulated, they all have the tendency to swarm, but they don't have actually swarm cells. If you actually have a mating yard close by, like I do with queens, when the young queens are actually going for a mating, they will actually fly over the apiary and they collect the drones behind them.
Right
Also,
on.
it actually triggers something else because a bee flight makes a certain pitch, a drone flight makes a certain pitch, and a queen flight makes a different pitch. Now the bees know exactly when there is a queen flying, and the hives that are very on the edge of swarming will actually follow that queen, and they will swarm, though they have no swarm cells, and the queen that is in a hive is so fat she cannot fly. She pretty much hops out of the hive like a frog, and she will be sitting in front of it, but they will follow that young queen and swarm. And people don't correlate that ever together.
Huh. What
That's
are
a
they
very
called?
well, I don't think you find that too often in a book, but I call it actually a mating swarm.
Excellent.
Can you, okay.
Wow. How many who are commercials here have had that happen in their apiaries? Josh, or if Ian's here or not?
We have 2 Ians on the actual list, but I'm not sure if that's if there's an Ian Stepler in the crowd, if that's who you're looking for, Tim.
No, Ian Stepler is not online.
But we do have I think I saw Rob or Mark Smith online, and they're
Is Josh still here?
Yeah, I'm still here. It's not something that I've ever come across in my time, but it's also not something that I've seriously been looking for either. So it's good to learn about.
No, it's interesting. All right.
I did see that, Tim. I did see that one time. I don't know if it was that,
Yeah.
but I've never understood what happened because it was, I think it was my second summer as a beekeeper.
Mhm.
But the queen left the hive with a number of bees, but ended up within 10 feet of the hive. And they ended up just kind of going back toward the hive and taking up their little cluster underneath the pallet that the hive was on. And I've never really understood that, but you know, maybe that's what happened.
Rob or Mark Smith, I see you're there. In your experience as commercial beekeepers, have you ever had to deal with that? Hold on. Well, sorry, guys, I had your mic muted. I'm sorry, I just had your mic muted. Could you start from the beginning?
Yeah. Between you and... Okay. Between you and Mark, it's been back and forth on the meeting. Because we're not doing queen rearing by and large, we get some cells to make up nukes, but so we're not in a situation where we're likely to see that. One of the things that hasn't been mentioned, I know this used to be very common in the spring, particularly if you were waiting for queens from elsewhere and the hive was getting very populous. It was a two-brood super hive. Sometimes you'd reverse the supers. You take the top one and put it on the bottom and put the bottom one on the top, and it changes the configuration of the cluster inside. It's no longer a sphere. It's kind of two semicircles. And that seems to slow them down in terms of their impulse to swarm. But if people have access to queens, you don't need to do that. But if you were trying to hold a hive together, so that the other thing, of course, people go in and cut out the queen cells, but it's really hard to make sure you get them all in terms of suppressing swarming. because some of them are not that visible. They're kind of tucked in.
Right on.
Wow.
Okay. We're going to go down the list here a little bit. And of course, crowding, we sort of covered a little bit of that, what can happen. The abundance of resources is another cause of swarm, especially, I think this may be, and Wald can attest to this, I have a feeling that as the temperatures get up into that plus 20, plus 5 maybe, we're going to have an abundance amount of floral and pollen and nectar kind of flowing very quickly and very rapidly. And those big hives are going to go out and start foraging, bringing all the stuff in, and they're going to be an abundance of resources, which could create the trigger for a lot of swarms. Genetics. I don't know if Walt wanted to add any more to that. And if you're going to comment, could you comment on the age of the queen and how that causes swarming?
Waldemar?
Yep. Abundance of resources. Well, it's I guess it's part of the package. It's pretty hard for bees to swarm if they don't have resources, because they actually have to physically load up with honey and nectar and take it along to swarm. Genetics and age of queen. Well, I have right now a queen is 2015 and she never swarmed. That's definitely his genetics, but I would correlate the age more to it than anything else. My suggestion: anybody that actually can get his hands on or raises queens, when you catch actually a swarm, you can actually cage a young queen that is mated, and you add it into the box while you shake the swarm in. And 24 hours later, you go back and remove the old queen and release the young one. This way, you actually break the swarming cycle and you eliminate the genetics that you don't want to be in your hives.
So basically, keep the swarm, but swap out the queen, and
Exactly.
and get the full benefit of the experience.
Yep.
And I'm
The older my queens are getting, the better they are. Is the reason being, just think about it this way: we live in an area where it's hard to winter bees, and this is a hive that wintered 5 times with the same queen through the harshest winters that you can imagine, and still builds up in the springtime, as well as a young queen that sits right beside her. So that's attesting also to how selective we can get with genetics.
What's the oldest queen you've ever kept, Waldemar? Just at a
6 years. 6 years.
Holy smokes!
Yeah. And the thing was, actually, it happened that she swarmed on a 6th year, and she flew away.
She was fed up of working. Waldemar, can you comment on the pheromone dilution levels per bee, or the percentage? Can you comment on that? Or?
It's only important if you have too much population in a hive and not enough work.
Right.
If you can run a 80,000 bee population in a hive within the honey season, and you will not have actually issues with swarming, because the hive is focused on producing honey and nectar and everything else. Once you actually have a situation where there is no nectar flow, that's when they get that idea we could actually do something else. So the age of the queen is not necessarily the factor when there is less pheromones. It's usually, it will happen right in the beginning. After about, I would say, 21 days, once the first brood is starting to hatch, that queen laid, she actually starts to be in full production of all the pheromones that she will produce. And if at that point in time she is not capable of building up a nuke, you already see the issue with her down the road. So it's something that I would not keep. It's not like her glands are gonna get better. A young queen produces as much as a queen that is maybe a year or two old.
Great. Here's a question for everybody. It's an interesting question, and I'd like you to think about it before you answer. Out of all 7 of these conditions, which ones do not fall under the beekeeper's responsibility, or another way to say it, it's out of their control? Anybody can answer. Which ones does not fall under the beekeeper's responsibility, or it's out of their control?
I can hear everyone typing right now. Come on, guys.
I will say it's a tricky question. So whoever can.
Environmental conditions.
Oh, yes, I did deal with environmental conditions. Anybody want to comment on environmental?
Yeah.
Dave is commenting pheromone levels and environmental conditions.
We're controlling environmental conditions now, though.
Yes, temperatures.
If you have rain for several days and the bees are really congested in the hive, that's a real setup for swarming.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. So anybody answer that question?
Well,
Did someone say just environmental conditions?
I think the environmental conditions seems to be the biggest favorite, but pheromone levels was mentioned as well. So
As well, eh? Yeah. Actually, I'm playing with you. It's a little bit of a trick, and you can disagree with me on this. But I believe that every single one of these points can be managed by the beekeeper. And the more experienced you are as a beekeeper, and the tools that you have, you're able to pretty well control every single one of them. So if we do have environmental conditions as an example, like what we've experienced, and that's the reason why we started off with several people kind of describing what they did. I think Dave mentioned that he pulled it out from indoor, but he also covered them up with insulation to try to prevent whatever he was trying to prevent. So it was a little tricky question. So I'm suggesting in my own way that none of these here are not preventable. You, as a good beekeeper, our goal should be to strive to be able to understand how to deal with all these 7 points. Does that make sense?
okay, well, Tim, go through them one by one and explain how we have that kind of control.
Well, I would like to, but let's leave that one for another time, because I think we're at 8:23 right now. We want to go to the next point, pre-swarm preventions. But if you think about it, we have tools and we have the abilities to be pretty well manage most of these things. Now, anyway, it's just a thought. And if anything, just kind of ponder on that and just say, okay, 7 points, how can I control this area here, et cetera? And I think you will find some answers very easily. That was something that kind of came to me today. So going into pre-swarm preventions, some people have double brood box. I don't know how many on this seminar have double brood box. And Rob just finished mentioning that he reverses the hive box there. So that's one way of doing it. And also checkerboarding is one of the techniques that is used when they reverse it. But in this case here, they're basically bringing the brood boxes at the top, bringing it down to the lower level, and allowing it to work back up to that second box again. I'm more familiar with the single brood box expansion here. So here are several ways that it can be done. If anybody else can comment, I'll give you some other suggestions that I didn't write on here because some of them get a little bit tricky, and I'm not so sure how appropriate they may be at this stage in our beekeeping. But if anybody wants to comment, please. Excuse me.
Thank you, so three of them. Yeah.
Hey, Tim, I think that you can actually, in some ways, I know some beekeepers also do this, is use both techniques basically at the same time. Is in spring, you allow them to build up to that double brood box to make sure they have enough space not to swarm. And then you take your splits off of them, and then just the honey flow starts, you knock them back down to that single brood box.
Right.
And then they're off into the honey. So it's just another option. I don't know if you're going to have that coming up.
No, I'm going to just leave it at this here, but those are good points. Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah. Are we muted?
Nope, I can hear you.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay.
Okay. One of the things, we winter as singles, but when we put the second brood box on, we use that to make up nukes. But when we're ready to go into honey flow, we'll often shake the bees down or shake them outside, put the second box on, even with brood in it, but make sure the queen is in the bottom. When that brood hatches out, the bees will backfill it with honey.
Right.
So you're going into the honey flow with more bees.
Excellent. Yep. What about the practice of removing the old queen and queen cells, like an artificial swarm? What's your guys' experience? Does it work or not work? Does it prevent swarming or not?
Oh, second year queens are more likely to swarm than new queens. So if you take the old queen and put her into a nuke, which is then weaker and not going to swarm, and put a new queen in, that hive isn't likely to swarm in that season.
Okay. So there's another technique. I didn't write it in here, but I wanted to just highlight it just in case somebody decides to do that. Any other comments? I've read that additional shaking of nurse bees in front of a weaker colony by removing the nurse bees greatly slows down and reduces congestion in the developing hive.
Yes.
So that's another one. I have to do an emergency issue here because I got an unexpected queen, and I was going into this cold weekend. So I ended up shaking some nurse bees out of one of my big hives and put her into a mating nuke to try to preserve a queen for a few days, and releasing it tomorrow, I guess, into a new system. So I guess in my case, where I took a frame of nurse bees, it kind of slowed down or reduced that heavy building hive a little bit. So maybe that helped me to have an extra day. Anybody have any experience on caging the queen to break the brood cycle? Any comments on that one? Breaking the brood cycle. Waldemar, are you there?
Hello?
Yeah.
Yep.
Any experience in caging the queen and breaking the brood cycle?
Hello?
Hi, can you hear us, Waldemar?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you. I know this may not be part of your regular operation, but I'm sure you've done it in your history.
Yep.
Caging the queen to prevent a swarm?
Preventing a swarm, maybe not so much, but actually breaking the brood cycle and having the brood hatch and treat them for mites, that I have done. I experimented with caging queens, how long you can cage them, how long they are viable and don't take any damage from caging. So I caged young queens that were mated and were laying for 2 weeks. I caged them on the smallest cage that is available, like the GCBZ cage there. And every week I actually replaced the nurse bees in there. I had about 8 nurse bees in it. And after 2 months, I actually introduced her into a nuke. She built a full hive till fall time. And I watched her after that for 2 years. There was no damage to her.
Quick question, Waldemar. In your experiments of caging queens for longevity or viability,
Yep.
Was temperature ever a variable in that experiment?
Absolutely. The holding temperature for a mated queen should be below 30 degrees and above 25.
Is there any benefits to caging queens below 25 degrees Celsius?
We all know that the queen actually is a sperm bank too.
Right.
So at a certain temperature, you start losing the viability of the sperm.
Well, I know that's true for heat, but is it also true for chilling? Like I guess my question is that if you're banking queens at a cooler temperature, does it preserve or damage the sperm?
I guess it will vary, depends on how many nurse bees you have with that queen and how well they will take care of her. My experience is as such, if I have a small unit coming through the winter, like let's say a frame or so with bees left, and I usually will shake those bees into something else and make up a nuke and insert that queen just to have a unit. Within I'd say a month after that unit is going, usually the bees will go and try to replace that queen.
Okay.
So whatever we see is functioning, the bees consider it to be dysfunctioning.
Well, that makes sense because they're seeing a different perspective, and we have a whole different level of expectations, and it doesn't always run the same with them as well. So no, I appreciate your answer. That's very insightful. Tim, over to you.
Okay, we're gonna just kind of conclude here. If anybody has any questions at this point in time, this is a good time to ask. Here are some references or resources that you can go ahead and take a look at for those who are wanting to get information. I've already highlighted the Swarm Essentials by Stephen Rapasky. It's about a $20 book there. Very, very worthwhile. I've already given Dr. Clarence Collison's name before. I, for some reason, have a tendency of seeing a lot of his videos. And this particular YouTube video called Applying the Basics of Honeybee Biology covers some of those mathematical numbers that I mentioned in there. And it's a very, very good, reminder for those who have had a lot of experience. And of course, the second video, the spring hive management, for anybody who's wanting to kind of get further details into it, it's quite worthwhile. Take a photo with your camera of the screen, and then you have the information there. Outside of that, I don't have a whole lot more to bring out on this, unless someone else has information. We're already at 8:34. If you're hearing the noise in the background, I have to apologize. My daughter dropped a bucket of paint on our carpet, and she's trying to suck it up and do whatever, and it's very inconvenient.
Oh my God, it's also very expensive. So
yes, it's probably destroyed the carpet and a few other things. So So it's not just managing hives, but managing family.
Very good. I
Any other?
would like to open up the floor for questions or comments. Anything from the novice crowd. I know that especially in environments like this, people are absolutely scared to ask what they consider a stupid question, and I am constantly reinforcing that that doesn't exist. There are no stupid questions. If there's anything that was said or presented, any slide, any comment, any question that wasn't answered to your satisfaction or still leaves doubt in your mind, ask it now. We have got so many people online with, like, if I calculated the years of experience we had collectively, it would be absurd. But so don't be scared or feel that your question is too basic or too simple, especially for the novice crowd. If you have any clarification, this is the time to ask. Type it in or raise your hand. Rachel, I'm going to unmute your mic here. Rachel,
No, I don't have anything to add.
Okay, sorry, I confused you with Rebecca. You got a question?
Yeah, I do. It's not really related to swarming, but I'm curious. I went into one of my hives last Wednesday and discovered a significant amount of drone brood on the face of the frame on more than one frame. I would say it was 2. And I found the queen, so it doesn't seem to be like a drone layer situation or anything. And I'm wondering if there is something that I should be thinking about that I'm not aware of.
Well, I mean, the most basic and obvious answer is that perhaps there's an issue with your queen and they're gearing it towards replacing her and stacking the deck. But I'll definitely refer that to those with more experience. Josh, would you like to field this one?
Not really, no.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you know what? Give it your best shot, and then we'll see if you're right.
I think maybe a Waldemar might be a better option for this this question here.
This is Rob. I'm going to comment.
Okay.
Am I alive there?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. The likelihood is that the frame already had drone cells on it. If there were at some time in the past, if there was damage to the frame, a mouse hole or something, they usually repair it with drone-sized cells. And the queen comes upon those and she automatically lays drone unfertilized eggs, which become drones. So the likelihood is that you need to change those frames out first opportunity. Maybe move them to the side of your brood box and then eventually remove them or pull them up above your excluder and so you can extract them. But it's the drone cells are likely already there. They probably weren't made this spring. If they're making spring drone cells, they're likely on the sides or on the bottoms of the frames. If they're right on the face of the frame, they were probably there before.
Thank you.
I also see that Ron Rousset had a question that I'm not sure got dealt with at 8:01. It was in the chat.
Can you field that, Marg?
Yeah, we had a queenless hive last week, capped brood larva, but no eggs with queen cells. We removed the cells and added a queen. Was that a mistake? That's the question he asked.
In cold weather, if it's not a very big hive, they could temporarily shut down rearing or egg laying. So it's not in the springtime when they're cooler weather, having a brief shortage of eggs in a weaker hive isn't that unusual. If you requeened it and that old queen was still there hiding around the corner, the likelihood is the new queen isn't going to survive.
Very good. There's a question in the chat here. So a question on queen rearing. By having a finishing box, can I put my queen cells in nuke boxes and let them hatch in my newly made nuke? What are some things that I have to watch for? So I guess if you see queen cells in your nuke boxes, can you transplant bees or that frame with the cell on it and basically create a walkaway split? Yeah, you can if you've got the bees to support it. The question always will be is why was that queen cell made? And if it's a supersedure, then you're sort of shooting yourself in the foot, I think. And if it's congestion, you're dealing with a swarm queen. Anyone else want to chip in on that?
I was going to comment that it also depends on what kind of a queen cell has been made, because it may create more of a problem. I've used swarm queen cells that are perfectly formed and beautiful, large, and I've taken that frame with that 1 or 2 swarm cells and put it into a small 5-frame nuke box with the upper food source. And I did that last year, and I've got beautiful, beautiful, large hives coming out of that this spring.
I've never had a problem with using swarm cells in where I needed a queen, but I've always made careful notes on replacing her as soon as possible because I never have trusted swarm genetics, and that might be overkill for some people's ideology, but I think if they made a swarm cell, you're going to get a swarm queen. And if you're spoiled for choice, replacing her is your best option. Rebecca, your hand's up. Did you have a question?
From my other question. I'll put it down now. There we go.
Oh, do you have any new questions, Rebecca?
I have so many questions all the time. But I'm good for now.
Okay.
I have an addition to that last question there. Just once you've put the cell into your nuke box, oftentimes you're going to be putting up a couple frames of brood in there and items like that, and it's going to be 12 days or more actually before that queen is mated, if she gets mated, right? So you have to recall that there's a percentage of those queens that won't make it back to the hive. So I mean, you want to keep an eye on that to be sure you do have a mated queen in there, and if not, you're going to be adding more brood and another cell to that colony or restarting completely. So there is that risk in using queen cells rather than mated queens in your splits.
Yeah, good point. I do have a question I'm sorry, because some of the time when you log on to WebEx, sometimes you get the name or sometimes you get the email. So Sturbs87, putting your mic, I'm unmuting your mic. You had a question? Sturbs87?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you. What's up?
Okay. So yeah, in regards to grafting my own queens, this is probably Waldemar's like highway here. I'm going to be starting grafting my queens, and so obviously the best way to do that, to get your queens mated and introduce them into your nuke boxes, would have them mated already into a mating box or a mini nuke to mate them and then introduce them into your nuke. I'm just worried about introducing a cell, my grafted cell, into a nuke, and as Josh did state there, maybe they don't accept her, or she doesn't get mated or flies away. I'm also worried about drifting with my split with my nukes, of having drifting back to the original box.
Waldemar, can you field this one?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. So the cells are either right after being capped are not very sensitive, or basically 2 days before they hatch, so day 14, you can transfer them. Anything in between, you have to be very, very careful. If you bump them, then the larva dislodges from the food, from the jelly, so basically it will die. So making up nukes, the best nuke is actually if you make it up and haul it 3 kilometers away or a couple of miles. So actually your field force is staying with the nuke. If you do make it and you have it in your home yard, you actually have to shake a substantial amount of more bees into it in order for it to have a certain size. Still, even with the size, you have a problem, because the field force will actually fly back to original hive, and your made up nuke that stays in the original yard will become to be a cripple for a few days, because you physically don't have any bees that will haul water for them. That's an issue that you have if you don't actually haul the nuke somewhere else. Acceptance of a queen. If your queens are actually in a mating box and they're mated and they start laying, you actually have to wait until they start capping over her first larva. And once she is at that stage, she actually reached that full potential of pheromone production. And I don't recommend this, but most often I just pick up that queen, mark her, and just run her straight onto a frame into the nuke that I made up.
Hold on. You don't recommend this, but usually you
I do that because it's my own doing. So I have enough queens. I have enough queens to do it, and 99.9% they're all accepted.
Okay, so if
I'm just saying, this is how high the pheromone levels are at that moment. You know, you can do it, but if you have it actually in a cage, the pheromone level will drop a little bit. So the less that queen travels from your mating box into the nuke box, or less time passes in between, the better the acceptance rate. This is why when we get actually queens from out of country, they're so badly accepted.
Well, and I know because I've bought queens from you, you're pretty adamant on, okay, your queens are ready, get the hell out here and pick them up.
Pick them up.
And I guess, you know, and it's a good thing, because the acceptance rate is increased the sooner I pick up the queens and get them into my own colonies, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, it's about no.
And I want to add something to it. Actually, the best time to introduce queens if there is a small honey flow on, because then the full field force is out, and you actually have just the nurse bees in the hive, and they're not aggressive period towards the queens, so they are accepted very good.
I'll put them in on a rainy day.
I think one of the options, if you don't have the option to move your hive or your nuke 3 kilometers away, is the nuke that you're making up, move the existing hive and put that nuke where the existing hive was. Then you don't have the issues with the field force, because the field force is going to come back towards that nuke, and your existing hive will have some field force in it to take care of the hive. And in regards to putting the cell directly into a full-size nuke rather than a mating nuke, which would usually be smaller in size, it really all comes down to the potential potential, yeah, like I said before, the potential sacrifice of resources, right? You know, it's if you're making it in a small mating nuke, you have very little, in order to get to a bred status and ready to be laying, it's less of a sacrifice of bees.
Yeah, the average success rate is 75%. So you're losing about 25%. If you make up 100 nukes, 25 of them might end up without the queen. And it very much varies where you're located. If you're closer to an area that has wetlands and swamps, have dragonflies and birds that feed on bees, so you have a higher loss actually.
See.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Am I still on?
You are.
Yeah.
I want to add something to this. A big plus actually with a small mating nuke is not only that you actually have a very small amount of bees in there, but it also very easily to see the queen in there and check her after the hatch.
Yeah.
Because there is also a certain percentage of the queens that are hatching out of a perfect cell, and there might be a wing that is folded. There might be sometimes a leg that is not there. So all of those things you can actually pre-check before you actually put this cell or this queen into a nuke that you already made up with 4 frames, and the resources in the mating box is a lot smaller. So a handful of bees, even if that mating box fails completely, you can actually shake it out, restart it with another cell. It's just a handful of bees.
David Lee, you had a question?
Yeah, mating boots for Waldemar and Josh. Drawing out your comb for your mating boxes. How do you guys pull that off?
Josh, let's start with
I'll
you.
go. Yeah, so I've tried a few different designs of the mating nukes, and my latest design, actually 4 of them fit perfectly on top of a regular dimension hive, corner to corner. And so what I'm doing this year, and I think my latest video actually showcased what I'm doing, if anybody is on YouTube, is to put those on there for my regular hives to draw out. So we'll have a little bit of a later start on those to using them, but you let your full size hives draw those out, and actually if you set it up correctly, that queen will actually come up and lay some eggs in them as well, and that'll give you a good start to those mating nukes, those frames.
Yeah, I did see your video. I watched that. I was just wondering how it was going. So.
Well, we haven't had the best of weather since I made that video, so I actually haven't been back into the hives. It will take a little bit of time. The queens or the bees will really start packing on that fresh comb in there once the dandelions start here for us. That seems to be really the time when they start making a lot of comb, and that should be coming up soon. So I don't expect that they've done a whole lot of work in there yet.
Waldemar, did you have anything to add? You use a lot of mating nukes.
You all saw my mating nukes. They're all styrofoam, and I would highly recommend it. Reason being is you are dealing with a very small unit already, and any temperature fluctuation actually does a pretty good impact on them. So a good styrofoam mating box is worth the money. First of all, you can start them earlier, and secondly, they develop better in there. They actually are capable of keeping the heat in there. They're capable of managing it very well. So the way I do mine is I just have a small starter strip in a frame, and well, beekeeping should be an all-around thing. So to prevent swarms, you can actually shake some bees out of your standard hives, and this is what I do to populate actually my mating boxes. And yeah, it's about say about a handful of bees that goes in one of them, and I start them out actually with a hatched queen that is hatched, and with a bunch of bees, I throw them all in there, let them sit for about 12 hours, and then after 12 hours, there's a feeder trough in the back. I feed them liquid syrup, and I have them sitting another 24 hours in the cold, and then in the evening, I carry them outside, and basically within 24 hours after that, the queen goes for her first orientation flight, and within 6 days, she has actually made it. And they're already, if everything is a unit, if everything is together, they're already starting to draw out the comb. And as soon as when she comes back from the mating, they're drawing it so fast when they have that syrup available. It's like within 24 hours, they completely finish those 3 small frames. So it doesn't take much. I don't want to call it playing, but I tinkered around with actually adding those small frames on top of my hives, and it just adds so much extra work. So in order to streamline it, I'm sticking to shaking bees, adding it into the box, letting them draw out the small frame. And like I said, but on top of everything else, if you don't have brood in the frames in that mating box, you need to have a live queen. Otherwise, they will abscond. You cannot add a cell into a mating box where you just shook bees into it. It has to be a live queen. If you want to deal with cells right from the beginning, then it's better if those small frames actually have a little bit of brood in it. Something has to keep the bees in the box. It's either the brood that is there, or it is the queen that is there. If both are not present, the bees will abscond and they go somewhere else.
Yeah, Waldemar, that's something that I ran into with those small. I had the styrofoam nukes when I first started from the ones you can buy at BMate. I don't know who makes them, but trying to, especially early in May, when you want to get those cells started for most years, shaking bees into there and just putting a cell in, it wasn't the answer. Like you said, the bees just disappear, and you have cells that are no longer worth anything in them.
Yeah, you need to have a live queen. Basically, has either you incubate until the end in a hive, or you incubate it in the incubator, so until she hatches. So this is how I usually start them out. And once the first queen actually lays a little bit of brood in there, you can actually take her out and put the next cell, and then it works. But the climate is definitely much easier for them to control in a styrofoam box.
Again, Serbs 87. You have a question? Your hand is raised.
Oh.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Forgot to take it down.
Okay, take it down. I'm looking for any questions from the field. David Lee, you've got your hand up. Is there a question you've got?
No, I'm good. I'm trying to take my hand down. Sorry.
We're all new at this. No worries. No worries.
I think I saw Rob Smith raising his hand on the video.
Waldemar, you've got your hand up as well if you want to toggle that, or if you've got a question. Rob, Waldemar?
I'd just like to add something to that question about the drones on the frame.
Sure.
The previous comment there, I wouldn't worry about it. The reason being is basically swarming is like sex life for the bees, okay? And so as long as there is no drones in the hive, nothing is happening. So starting up for them actually to lay eggs for the drones is like starting up their prep for swarming. However, there has been several studies done where majority of the drones were removed from the hive and the drone comb too. And basically those hives underperformed. They did not bring as much honey in as when you left all the drones in it. An average hive with about 60,000 population will run about between 3 to 5,000 drones in the summertime. And that's absolutely normal. If you take those drones out, they will not produce as much honey. So it's not quite proven yet, but they think that the drones produce some sort of a pheromone too.
Well, I've heard, and maybe you can collaborate. Um, there's a certain aspect of keeping drones around that keeps the colony happy. And maybe it's just a sense of security that if anything does happen to the queen, that there is a survival chance there because there is drones available to mate. So whether it's needed or not, I think there's a certain drone population any healthy colony will sustain because it's almost like an insurance policy. That's kind of abstract and not really proven in a lot of studies, but it does kind of follow suit that if you took every piece of drone comb out and every drone you eliminated, they would pretty much well focus on replacing that drone population. And, the reason for that is I think bees look towards replacing their genetic component, not producing you honey. And we have to keep in mind that their goals are not always our goals. So, no, that's my 2 cents anyway.
That's one of the complexities and issues that I have with using drone cone as pest management control for Varroa is what becomes a good proper balance to still maintain so much drone in your hive and not removing them all with the drone frames.
Well, you also have to ask that when you're using drone comb as a Varroa, one of the tools in your belt for Varroa control is there's a cost. There's always a cost. If you collect pollen, there's a cost. If you're just into strict honey production, there's a cost. If you're into nuke production, there's a cost. There's always a cost. And having the bees put all that resources and time into a frame of drone, well, there's a cost, and you have to balance that out in your operation. Is this worth it to you? I mean, because if you have other mite control, it may not be. If you're trying to be more holistic and the results are working for you, then it may be a route that you want to go. But you always have to factor in that every decision you make has a variable that impacts your yield, it impacts your health of your bees, and then it impacts your time. So it's all about balance, in my opinion. Tim?
Vice versa, the drones are actually that in the hive. We know by now that only about 25, at the highest, at 33%, are actually viable. The rest of them are either not mature enough for a mating flight, or they are actually too old. And an overaged drone is also not viable to produce actually sperm.
Mm-hmm.
Or the sperm is there, but it's actually not liquid enough anymore. Let's put it this way. It's just not. It has to have that certain age where that drone actually is capable and viable to fly and mate with the queen. So if you only have 30% out there that are capable, you don't know which 30% are of those are actually capable. So I would suggest to keep them in the hive.
Well, I know a lot of people use drone comb as not necessarily as Varroa mite control, although it is effective, but also as for testing. Like there's, especially with setups that have extra space, they always fill it full of drone comb, and it's really convenient to scrape off a raft of 20 or so cells, rip them open, and see how many Varroa are in there to get a very ad hoc field test of your mite percentage. That being said, I mean, if you're encouraging them to behave a certain way, giving them extra space, creating that drone comb, I mean, you have to be conscientious of that's the cost you're going to pay is for every drone, for all the resources that are put into raising that drone and capping that drone brood. There's a certain weight of honey or pollen or anything else that goes with that. Just keep that in mind when you're choosing your weapons of battle when you're going after mites.
Vice versa, just imagine how much food has to go in there. So we actually have a significant amount of nurse bees in the hive and have a big amount of drone comb that takes extra food. That means actually you're reducing your swarming intensity there too.
Well, yeah, it's one of those things where it's like you do this, this happens. You do that, this happens, and you got to be conscientious on the decisions that you're making. If you're encouraging drone reproduction, then you're obviously going to impact worker in production. So make sure that you're seeing the full impact of the choices that you make. Everyone has their own operation. Everyone has their own method and whatever works for them. And it's hard to criticize or critique the way someone keeps bees if they're successful and if they're happy in the way the results are coming across. But that all boils down to, again, if you focus the bees' production on brood or pollen or drones, then there's gonna be a cost to it. I've got a couple of questions in chat here I want to field, and the first one is about vegetable shortening. One second here. Regarding Varroa, someone just suggested to me that I add a little dish of shortening in the hive to assist in mite control. Personally, I've never heard. That's a new one, and that's rare. Does anyone else have anything to chip into that? Adding a dish of shortening to the hive to assist in mite control? You can either type it or Waldemar, have you ever heard anything like that?
Well, I heard that people were treating with oil, spraying it in, but I also heard very bad things about them because the person said, well, specifically the ones that actually took this and ran a test on it, said it worked to a certain extent, but probably because the smell disoriented the smell of the mite, and that she couldn't find the open cells anymore to reproduce. But it did a pretty bad job on the hive himself. So I have never used it. I don't know how to apply it. Just read the things about the oil. So how do you add a dish of shortening into the hive?
Yeah, it seems a little iffy. Jim Campbell, I unmuted your mic. Have you heard of anything of that in your years of experience?
No, I've never used anything like that at all. I'm not too keen on using that. The only reason I would use something like that fat content is just to check Varroa at the bottom. So when you put in the sticky board, I've used like PAM or something like that. So that's the only reason I would use some kind of component like that.
Yeah, if anyone else has something to add to that particular Tangent, please raise your hand.
Yeah, wow, this has been a very interesting discussion. I don't have anything more to add.
Do we have any other questions or any other concerns that someone want to bring up in the forum?
Maybe the one comment, I guess you guys were dealing with the trap for the mites. I don't use that bottom board thing. What I actually end up using for early spring tracking down mites to do a mite count only is I go to Walmart and I buy that sticky shelf paper rolls that you could buy for a couple of bucks. And you peel off the one side of it, and I cut it to the size of the screen that you use for these sticky mite count board. Anyways, I cut the paper, take off the extra paper, put the screen, slide it underneath there, and I leave it for about 3 days. And then I come back and I pick it up, and then I do my mite count there. And I usually do that one very first time in the spring because I don't want to kill any population of the hive early. And then my next mite count will be done probably in the next week or so for May. And I will do a wash. I always use wash, but I like to use it when I have more population. That's just a quirk of mine.
It's very, very important that even though we're into spring, people should still be monitoring their mite load regardless. I don't care what you went in the winter, even if it was below 1%. Mites are sneaky and they creep up, and being constantly vigilant is a chief attribute of being a successful beekeeper. Rob Smith, or sorry, Rob and Marg, your hand is up. Something to add?
I just wanted to say thank you for the chance to have a roundtable chat. It's good to hear the questions that come in from people who are new to this and so on, and good to be able to be here. Thank you so much, Tim and John.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Well, and a big thank out to Brad as well.
Yes.
He has been sort of the tech guru, go-to, oh my God, how do we pull this off person? And I really appreciate your contributions. Waldemar as well. I know that this COVID thing has pushed us all beyond our comfort zones when it comes to technology. And being able to reach out over the internet has been a crucial link in keeping Red River to be a viable and helpful resource, especially for new beekeepers. So thank you, Waldemar, and thank you for all the experienced and senior beekeepers. And I know what you're going through because I'm going through it myself, where it's like, I've never owned a webcam in my life, for God's sakes, and I'm not enthusiastic about it. And I'm more concerned about how my messy office background looks to everybody. But, you know, it's one of those things where thank you so much for contributing. It's so important that people that are new in beekeeping to have that feeling that they can reach out and get questions answered on platforms like this. So, yeah, thank you everybody in the Red River Executive and all of our senior beekeepers for stepping up and showing leadership in this time. Last point. I will be sending invites very shortly for a new beekeepers or a novice webinar. And the reason why we're doing that is because it puts it in a more condensed, 15 or 16 person format, and people are less intimidated to ask questions. I will be tapping the shoulders of a couple of our experienced beekeepers to join in. So please keep an eye out in your inbox for that. Other than that, that's all I really have to say. Thank you so much for all of your contributions, and I'll leave the floor to Tim.
One comment, John. I was very intrigued on Josh Weeb's nuke Bach preparation that he had done, and I'd like to just warn Josh publicly right now that I'd like to have him do a forum or presentation on his success of those mating boxes, and take lots of pictures, lots of information, and you can do your song and dance at one of our sessions, hopefully in the future when we get to meet again. You still there?
Sorry, Tim, you're breaking up. Can't hear you.
Oh, good one.
Yeah, we'll work something out.
Yeah.
I'm not very good at public speaking. I'm a lot better behind the computer here where I don't have to see everybody, but we'll work it out.
Right on. Well, I thought this is good. Thank you guys for all joining. And again, Brad, thanks to you, because I had no idea how this works, and I don't even know how to turn my computer on. So there you go.
It's easier than beekeeping, but
And I'll leave the floor to Tim.
One comment, John. I was very intrigued on Josh Weeb's nuke Bach preparation that he had done, and I'd like to just warn Josh publicly right now that I'd like to have him do a forum or presentation on his success of those mating boxes, and take lots of pictures, lots of information, and you can do your song and dance at one of our sessions, hopefully in the future when we get to meet again. You still there?
Sorry, Tim, you're breaking up. Can't hear you.
Oh, good one.
Yeah, we'll work something out.
Yeah.
I'm not very good at public speaking. I'm a lot better behind the computer here where I don't have to see everybody, but we'll work it out.
Right on. Well, I thought this is good. Thank you guys for all joining. And again, Brad, thanks to you, because I had no idea how this works, and I don't even know how to turn my computer on. So there you go.
it's easier than beekeeping, but
A quick little update as well. The last time we had a webinar, I shot my mouth off and offered a whole bunch of selective prizes for people that sent in a honey cake recipe. And I just have to say, with the results in hand, they were all very delicious recipes. I've gained 5 pounds. My surgeon hates you. And you'll be receiving notice of what you get for your generosity in the near future. In the meantime, if there is nothing else anyone has to say, we have to cap this. It's 9:30 at night, and I wanted to say thank you very much for joining us today. It was very good to see such a fantastic turnout.